The night was silent, but it was not peaceful. The air was thick with smoke and the ground was broken with the marks of war. Strange machines lay in ruins, their metal bodies twisted and burning. The battlefield was quiet now, but the silence felt heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. In the middle of this destruction, a sound rose. It was small at first, almost hidden in the wind. A weak cry, a voice of a child. It echoed across the broken stones and the burned trees. It was not the cry of victory, nor the cry of pain. It was the cry of fear. There, among the shadows, sat a little alien girl. Her small body was covered in dust, her eyes wide with terror. She held her knees close to her chest, shaking as if the cold night could swallow her whole. Her people were gone. She did not know where. She only knew one truth. She was alone. Her world had fallen apart in one day. Monsters had come. She had seen them with her own eyes. Creatures with claws and teeth, creatures that hunted anything that moved. Her parents had tried to hide her, to keep her safe, but safety had broken like glass. Now, there was only the battlefield, only the night, and only her tears. The little girl's cry carried far. She did not want to call the monsters, but she could not stop. Her heart was too heavy. Her hope was too small. She whispered to herself, a soft voice in the dark, "Please, someone, anyone." The shadows moved. Her breath froze. She pressed her hands over her mouth. Her eyes darted toward the sound. It was there again, something shifting in the dark, something big. Her heart pounded in her chest. She thought the monsters had found her. This was the end. But what stepped into the faint glow of firelight was not a monster. It was something different. A figure, tall, strong, covered in armor that was broken and burned. The figure walked slowly, limping slightly, as if carrying wounds too deep to hide. The little girl stared, too afraid to breathe. It was a human. She had seen humans before, from far away, in stories told by her people. Some called them dangerous, others called them strange. She had never met one herself. And now, here stood a human soldier, his face hidden behind a cracked helmet, his steps heavy with exhaustion. The human stopped when he saw her. For a moment, the two simply looked at each other. The girl's eyes were wide, full of fear and mistrust. The soldier's eyes, though tired, carried something else. Not anger, not cruelty, but a quiet softness. The soldier slowly removed his helmet. His face was covered with dirt and blood, but his eyes were alive. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small container of water. Without saying a word, he placed it on the ground and gently pushed it toward her. The girl did not move. She hugged her knees tighter, her body trembling. The water sat in the dust between them, untouched. The soldier did not force her. He only lowered himself to sit, groaning as he did, the weight of his wounds heavy on him. For long minutes, the battlefield was silent again. Only the faint crackle of fire, only the whisper of wind, only the steady, slow breathing of two survivors who did not know if they could trust one another. The girl's eyes fell to the water. Her throat was dry, burning. She wanted it, but could she take it? Could she trust this human stranger? Her small hands tightened. She shook her head, whispering, "No. No." The soldier did not answer. He only leaned back against the broken wall beside him, his eyes watching the dark horizon. He looked tired, but alert. He was waiting, watching, protecting. A new sound broke the silence. Low, guttural, from the shadows beyond. The girl froze again. The soldier's eyes narrowed. He reached for his weapon. The monsters were close. The girl's heart raced. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body would not move. The soldier raised his weapon, his hands steady, though his body shook with pain. His eyes did not leave the shadows. The girl looked at him then, really looked. He was not her enemy. He was not here to hurt her. He was here to fight what lurked in the dark. And for the first time, the girl felt something she had not felt since the war began. A small spark, a fragile light. Hope. The shadows moved again. The monsters were coming. The soldier whispered something under his breath, words the girl could not understand. Then he looked at her, and for a moment their eyes met. His gaze was strong, steady, and full of promise. The little girl's tears stopped. Her hands slowly reached for the water. The night was no longer silent. The war was not over. The monsters were near, but she was no longer crying alone. She was not alone anymore. The monsters were near. Their heavy steps shook the ground. Their growls rolled across the ruins like thunder. The little alien girl pressed herself against the broken wall, her small body shaking. She thought her heart would explode from fear. The human soldier, though wounded and tired, rose to his feet. He moved with slow strength, lifting his weapon and pointing it toward the dark. His face showed no fear, only focus. He had faced death before, and he was ready to face it again. The girl's wide eyes never left him. She did not understand. Why was this human not running away? Why did he not leave her behind? He was strong enough to escape. She was weak. She was nothing. But still, he stood between her and the shadows. From the darkness, glowing eyes appeared. Then another pair. Then more. The monsters came crawling out, their bodies low, their fangs dripping with hunger. They had smelled fear. They had found prey. The soldier fired. The sound was loud, shaking the night. One monster fell, but more rushed forward. The soldier shouted, his voice strong, echoing across the ruins. He did not step back. He fought with fire and steel, his every move showing his promise. I will not let them touch you. The girl watched in silence. She had seen warriors before, but none like him. His body was broken, his clothes torn, yet he fought like a storm. Each time he fired, another monster screamed. Each time he swung his blade, another fell back into the dark. But the soldier was only one man. His bullets were few. His strength was fading. The girl saw it in his shaking arms, in the blood dripping from his side. Soon he would fall, and then so would she. Her breath came fast. Her eyes darted around. She saw a stone lying near her feet. Her small hands reached for it. She picked it up, her fingers trembling. She had never fought before. She was only a child. But if this soldier was willing to risk his life for her, then she could not just sit and watch. The monsters closed in. The soldier's gun clicked empty. No more bullets. He dropped it and raised his knife. His breathing was heavy, but his eyes still burned with fire. One monster leaped. Its claws stretched toward him. The girl cried out. Without thinking, she threw the stone. It hit the creature in the head. The monster turned, hissing at her. The soldier moved fast. His knife cut through the air. The monster fell, silent forever. For a moment, there was quiet again. The soldier turned his head. His eyes met the girl's. She had helped him. She had chosen to fight. A small nod passed between them. No words, only a silent truth. We are not enemies. We are together now. But the danger was not gone. The monsters still circled, growling, waiting. The soldier knew they could not stay here. Slowly, he stepped closer to the girl. He knelt, his face now closer to hers. His voice was deep but gentle. You have to move, he said. His words were in human language, but somehow the girl understood the meaning. His hand reached out, not to grab her, but to offer. The girl looked at his hand. For a long moment, she hesitated. She thought of the stories she had heard. Humans were cruel, humans were selfish. But the man before her was not cruel. He had fought for her, even when he had no reason to. Her small hand lifted. Slowly, carefully, she placed it in his. The soldier's grip was strong, steady. He pulled her up onto her feet. She was weak, her legs shaking, but his presence gave her strength. He guided her behind him, shielding her as they moved. Together they slipped through the ruins, step by step. The monsters followed, but they stayed back, watching. The soldier kept his knife ready. The girl clung to his arm, her eyes darting at every shadow. They moved until the firelight was behind them, until the ruins turned into dark streets of broken houses. The soldier stopped at a corner, leaning against the wall. His chest rose and fell hard. His wound was bleeding more. The girl noticed. Her eyes softened. She reached into her small pouch, pulling out a cloth. It was dirty, but it was all she had. She pressed it gently against his wound. The soldier looked down at her. For the first time, his face showed surprise. He had not expected kindness. Not here, not now. The girl whispered softly, her voice trembling, "Don't die." The soldier did not answer with words, but his eyes met hers, and in them was a promise. He would not die, not while she needed him. For the first time since the war began, the girl felt something warm. She did not know this human. She did not even know his name, but in her heart, she felt safer beside him than she had ever felt before. The monsters howled in the distance. The night was still dangerous. The war was not over, but a fragile bond had been formed. And in the ruins of a broken world, a soldier and a small alien girl began their journey. The ruins were quiet, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence before danger. The monsters had pulled back into the shadows, but their cries still echoed in the distance. They were waiting, watching, hunting. The human soldier sat with his back against a broken wall, his knife resting on his knee. The little alien girl sat beside him, her small hands clutching the cloth pressed against his wound. Her eyes stayed wide, afraid the blood would not stop. The soldier's breathing was heavy, but his eyes remained sharp. He scanned the darkness, never allowing himself to rest. The girl wanted to speak, but words felt trapped in her throat. Finally, in a trembling voice, she whispered, Why did you help me?" The soldier turned his head slightly. For a long moment he did not answer. His face was unreadable, shadowed by the faint glow of the fires behind them. Then, in a rough but steady voice, he said, "Because you were alone." The girl blinked. Alone. Yes. That word cut deep. She lowered her eyes. She thought of her family, of the way they had screamed when the monsters came. She thought of how the world had gone dark in one night. She was alone then, and she would have died alone, if not for him. The soldier leaned forward and tied the cloth tighter around his side. Then he pushed himself up onto his feet. His body swayed, weak, but he stood tall. He looked down at her and spoke again, his tone firm. "We move. Stay close." The girl hesitated. She was small, her legs weak, her fear heavy. But when she looked at the soldier, she saw strength. Broken strength, but strength still. She nodded and rose to her feet. They moved through the ruined streets together. The soldier led, the girl followed. Every corner was a risk, every shadow a trap. The wind carried strange sounds, scrapes, growls, whispers that made her skin crawl. She clung to the back of his armor, her eyes darting everywhere. At one point, they passed the skeleton of a massive machine, its wires hanging like dead vines. The girl stopped, staring. She remembered when machines like this walked proudly through her sea. Itty guarding her people. Now it was nothing but a broken shell. The soldier noticed her staring. He rested his hand briefly on her shoulder, guiding her forward. He did not speak. But that small touch carried meaning. Do not look back. Survive. Hours passed. The night seemed endless. The soldier's steps grew slower, his wound pulling at him. But he did not stop. The girl watched his struggle, and a thought formed in her young mind. If he fell, if he gave up, then both of them would die. She could not let that happen. When they found a small shelter beneath the ruins of a collapsed building, the soldier finally allowed himself to rest. He slid down against the wall, his face pale with exhaustion. The girl crouched beside him, her heart pounding. She whispered again, "Your name, what is it?" The soldier's eyes half closed, but he answered, "Daniel." His voice was rough, but the name carried strength. The girl repeated softly, "Daniel." It felt strange on her tongue, but also safe. Then she lowered her head and whispered, "My name is Alira." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then, despite his pain, he gave a small nod. Alira. The bond was made. But survival was not only about names, it was about food, water, safety. Daniel checked his pack. A few scraps of dried rations, a little water left, not enough for two. He looked at Alira, then back at the supplies. He pushed the food toward her. "Eat," he said. She shook her head quickly. "No, you need it." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're smaller. We keep you strong." Alira looked into his eyes and saw the truth. He would starve before letting her suffer. Her chest tightened. For so long she had believed no one cared if she lived or died. Yet here was a stranger, a human, who placed her life above his own. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. She took the food, broke it in half, and pushed a piece back into his hand. "We share." Daniel stared at her. Then slowly he accepted. For the first time since they met, a faint smile touched his lips. The night deepened. Outside, the shelter, the monsters prowled. Their howls shook the ruins, but they did not find the two survivors hidden in the shadows. Inside, Alira sat curled close to Daniel, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Daniel stayed awake, his knife in hand. His body screamed for rest, but he would not close his eyes. He had seen too many battles, too many deaths. But when he looked at the little alien girl beside him, sleeping with her tiny hand gripping his armor, something stirred inside him. He had lost comrades, friends, maybe even family in this war. But now he had someone new to protect, someone fragile, yet strong in her own way. Someone who had trusted him, even when she had no reason to. The bond was real now, not just words, not just survival, something deeper. The monsters howled again, closer this time. Daniel tightened his grip on the knife. His voice was a whisper, too soft for Alira to hear. "They'll have to kill me before they touch her." And so, under the broken sky, a wounded human soldier and a little alien girl began the hardest part of survival, not just staying alive, but staying alive together. The first light of dawn touched the ruins. The smoke of yesterday's battles hung low in the air, turning the rising sun into a dull red circle. Daniel opened his tired eyes. His body ached, his wound still burned, but he was alive, and beside him, curled close for warmth, was Alira. For a moment, he only watched her. She looked peaceful in sleep, but he knew it was not true peace. Her small face was marked by fear, her clothes dirty and torn, her tiny hands gripping the edge of his armor even as she dreamed. She did not want to be left alone again. Daniel pushed himself up slowly. His muscles screamed, but he forced them to obey. He could not stay here. The monsters would return. The ruins would not protect them forever. They had to move. He shook Alira gently. "Wake up." Her eyes opened at once, full of worry. But when she saw it was him, she relaxed. She sat up, blinking against the weak morning light. Where do we go?" she whispered. Daniel checked the horizon. Broken towers stood in the distance, their skeletons reaching toward the sky. Somewhere beyond them, he hoped, there might be a safe place. Maybe human soldiers, maybe shelter, or maybe nothing, but he had to try. "We walk," he said simply. Alira nodded. Her legs trembled when she stood, but she did not complain. She followed close behind him as they left the shelter and stepped into the open streets. The city was dead. Once it had been full of life, markets, laughter, voices in the air. Now it was only rubble and silence. The ground was cracked, the walls burned black. The only sound was the distant cry of creatures that still hunted in the shadows. Alira held her breath as they passed a collapsed building. The smell of smoke and decay was heavy. She whispered, "Monsters?" Daniel glanced at the dark opening of the ruins. He shook his head. "Not now, but stay quiet." So they walked, hour after hour, step by step. Daniel limped, each movement sending pain through his side, but he never slowed. Alira's small legs hurried to keep up, her eyes darting everywhere, always afraid of what might be waiting. At one point, they stopped near the skeleton of an old transport vehicle. Its metal body was torn open, its seats covered in ash. Alira stared at it, her mind drifting back to when she was with her parents. They had ridden in such a vehicle, laughing together. Her throat tightened. She bit her lip to stop the tears. Daniel noticed. He crouched beside her, his voice low. "Don't look back. Only forward." His words were firm, but his eyes were gentle. Alira nodded slowly. She wiped her eyes and followed him again. As the day grew hotter, their thirst grew sharper. Daniel handed her the last drops of water from his flask. She shook her head, pushing it back toward him. "You drink." He gave a small, tired smile. "I'm bigger. I can wait. You can't." Reluctantly, she drank. The water was warm, but it felt like life itself flowing through her. She glanced up at Daniel, her voice soft. "Thank you." He gave no answer, only turned his eyes back to the road. But deep inside, her words touched him more than she could know. By evening, they found a narrow path leading out of the city. Broken fields stretched before them, the land scarred by fire. Strange black shapes moved far in the distance, monsters, searching. Daniel held Alira's hand tightly, guiding her into the tall grass for cover. The world felt bigger now, emptier. Alira clung close, whispering, "Will we find your people?" Daniel's jaw tightened. He wanted to say yes, but truth weighed heavy. He did not know if his people had survived. He did not know if anyone was left at all. Still, when he looked at her small face, full of fragile hope, he forced the words out. "We'll find someone. We'll find safety." Her eyes brightened, even if only a little. That hope gave her strength to keep walking. Night came again, and they stopped beneath the remains of an old bridge. The stars shone above, brighter than Alira had ever seen. For a long time, she stared at them. Finally, she asked, "Do you miss your home?" Daniel sat with his back against the wall, his knife on his lap. His eyes softened as he looked at the sky. "Every day." "What was it like?" she whispered. He was silent for a moment, then said, "Blue oceans, forests that touched the clouds, cities full of light, and children running free." Alira's mouth opened slightly. She tried to imagine it. Her world had been filled with walls and machines, never oceans or forests. For the first time in days, she smiled faintly. "It sounds beautiful." Daniel looked at her and gave a small nod. "One day maybe you'll see it." The night grew colder. Alira curled close to him, her head resting against his arm. For the first time since her parents were taken, she felt safe enough to close her eyes without fear. Daniel stayed awake, watching the dark horizon. He knew the monsters were still out there. He knew tomorrow would bring more danger, more hunger, more pain, but he also knew something else. He was no longer walking alone. The journey had begun, and for both the human soldier and the little alien girl, it was no longer just about survival. It was about finding hope in a world that had forgotten what hope looked like. The night stretched long under the broken sky. Cold winds swept across the ruined fields, carrying with it the distant cries of monsters. Daniel sat with his back against the stone pillar of the collapsed bridge, his knife resting across his lap. His eyes never closed. Sleep was dangerous here. Beside him, Alira stirred in her restless dreams. Her small body shivered in the cold, and her hand clung to his sleeve as if afraid he might disappear if she let go. Each time the monsters howled, she whimpered softly, and Daniel's jaw tightened. At last, when the wind fell quiet, she opened her eyes. The stars above burned bright, filling the sky with silver light. She looked at Daniel, her voice a whisper. "Can't you sleep?" Daniel shook his head. "Not safe." Alira hugged her knees. For a while there was silence between them, but then she asked, "Do you think we will find safety?" Daniel's eyes softened, though his voice stayed steady. "We will." She studied him. She wanted to believe his words, but doubt filled her small heart. "How can you be so sure?" He looked up at the stars, his breath forming white mist in the night air. "Because I have to be." That answer puzzled her, but before she could ask more, Daniel began to speak, his voice low, as if he were telling a story to the night itself. "On my world, there are oceans," he said. Alira tilted her head. "Oceans?" "Water as far as the eye can see," Daniel explained. "Blue waves that rise and fall. The sound of them is like music. The air smells of sag. And the wind is cool. Children run on the sand, laughing. They build castles out of it. They chase the tide and pretend to fight it." Alira's mouth opened slightly. She had never seen such a thing. Her world had rivers, yes, but nothing endless, nothing alive like that. Her voice grew soft. "It sounds big." Daniel gave a small smile. "It is. When you stand by the shore, you feel small, but it also makes you feel alive." Her eyes sparkled faintly in the starlight. "Have you seen it?" "Many times," he said. His voice held both pride and sorrow. "And every time I wished I could stay longer." Alira hugged her knees tighter. She tried to picture the ocean, but her mind struggled. Still, she felt warmth in her chest. "What else?" she whispered eagerly. Daniel's eyes softened even more. "Forests, trees so tall you can't see the top. Their leaves dance in the wind, and the air smells fresh, green. Birds sing, and light shines through the branches like gold." Alira's lips curved into a faint smile. "Trees that tall?" He nodded. "When I was young, I climbed them. I fell more than once." His voice carried a small chuckle. The sound made Alira blink. It was the first time she had heard him laugh. Her heart felt lighter. "Tell me more," she begged. So he did. He spoke of fields of flowers that stretched for miles, of snow falling from the sky like soft white feathers, of children running through streets filled with light. He spoke of home. Alira listened with wide eyes, her fear forgotten for a moment. She had never imagined such wonders. Her world had been cold metal cities and strict voices. Her parents had worked every day, leaving little time for stories. But Daniel's words painted pictures in her mind, brighter than anything she had ever known. Finally, she whispered, "Do you miss it?" Daniel's eyes grew distant. His voice dropped low. "Every day." Her CBs has tightened. She could see the pain behind his eyes, the weight of loss. For the first time she understood, he was not just a soldier. He was a man who had lost his home, just as she had lost hers. Slowly, she reached out her small hand and placed it on his arm. "I'm sorry." Daniel looked down at her. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he gave a slow nod, accepting her simple comfort. The night grew colder. Daniel pulled his tattered cloak around Alira's shoulders. She looked up at him in surprise. "What about you?" He shook his head. "I'll manage." She clutched the cloak tightly. Her voice trembled, but she whispered, "You're not like what they said." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What did they say?" Alira lowered her eyes. "That humans are selfish, that they only care about themselves, that they destroy everything they touch." Daniel was silent. His jaw tightened, but then he sighed. "Maybe some are like that, but not all." Her eyes lifted to his. "You're not." Something warm stirred in Daniel's chest at her words. He did not show it, but he felt it. For so long, he had fought, killed, and bled. He had almost forgotten what it meant to be seen as something more than a soldier. Alira curled closer to him beneath the cloak. Her voice was faint, sleepy. "You're good." Daniel stayed silent, but his hand rested gently on her shoulder. As the stars wheeled above them, Alira drifted into sleep again, this time without fear. Daniel stayed awake, but his heart was not as heavy. He looked at the stars and thought of home, of oceans and forests, of children laughing. And for the first time since the war began, he allowed himself to hope, not just for survival, but for something beyond it. Because in the quiet of the ruins, he had found something unexpected. Not a mission, not a duty, but a bond, a reason to keep walking. The ruined land stretched endlessly. Days had passed since Daniel and Alira had left the city. Each day had been a battle against hunger, thirst, and fear, but nothing compared to what awaited them at the broken outpost. The outpost stood at the edge of a barren plain. Once it had been strong, walls of steel, towers with lights, soldiers guarding the gates. Now it was half destroyed. Broken fences leaned in the dust. The gate hung open, its metal twisted and burned. Smoke curled from the wreckage, and silence filled the air. Alira's small hand gripped Daniel's tightly. Her eyes widened as she looked at the ruins. Is anyone here?" she whispered. Daniel's eyes scanned the area. His chest rose and fell heavy with exhaustion. "Maybe," he said, though his voice carried little hope. They stepped inside the outpost, empty, abandoned. Only the wind moved, whistling through cracks in the broken walls. Daniel's jaw tightened. They had come all this way, but safety was still out of reach. He guided Alira toward the center of the base, where a half-collapsed command building stood. Perhaps there would be supplies, perhaps a radio, something, anything, to keep them alive a little longer. But the silence did not last. A howl split the air, deep, hungry, answered by another, then another. Alira froze. "Daniel!" He gripped his knife, his face hard. "They found us!" From the shadows outside the gate, the monsters appeared. Dozens of them. Their glowing eyes pierced the darkness, their bodies low to the ground, crawling closer. The sound of their claws scraped against the stone. Alira's heart pounded. She clung to Daniel's arm, trembling. "We can't fight them all." Daniel looked down at her. His face was pale, his body weak, but his eyes burned with fire. "We fight anyway." The first monster leapt. Daniel met it with steel. His knife flashed, cutting deep. The creature fell, but more came behind it. Daniel moved like a storm, striking, blocking, forcing them back. Every swing of his blade carried desperation, every strike a promise. "You will not touch her." Alira crouched against the wall, watching in terror. She wanted to close her eyes, but she couldn't. She couldn't leave him alone, not even in fear. She picked up a piece of broken metal and held it tight, ready to defend herself if one came too close. The monster circled. Daniel's breathing grew ragged. His wound bled again, staining his armor. He stumbled but did not fall. He could not fall, not while she was still there. "Stay behind me," he shouted, his voice echoing through the ruins. Alira's eyes filled with tears. "You'll die." Daniel's knife struck another monster down. His chest heaved, his body shaking. "Better me than you." The words broke her heart, but they also gave her courage. She stood, her small figure trembling but determined. "No, not alone. I'll fight too." One of the creatures lunged toward her. She screamed and swung the broken metal with all her strength. It struck the monster's face. The beast recoiled with a furious roar. Daniel was there in an instant, finishing it with a final blow. He glanced at her, eyes fierce. "Good, don't stop fighting." The swarm grew thicker. They poured through the broken gates, their howls shaking the night. Daniel's arms ached. His blade felt heavy, but he fought on. Each strike slowed him. Each movement burned with pain. At last his knee buckled. He fell to one side, the knife slipping from his hand. A monster leapt at him, claws raised. "No!" Alira cried. She threw herself forward, swinging the broken metal again. It slammed into the monster's jaw. The creature staggered back just enough for Daniel to grab his knife and drive it into its chest. The two of them collapsed together, gasping. The monsters growled, circling closer, waiting to strike the final blow. Alira clutched Daniel's arm, tears streaming down her face. "Don't die. Please, don't leave me." Daniel looked at her, his vision blurred, his strength fading. But his voice, though weak, was steady. "As long as I breathe, I'll protect you." The monsters crouched, ready to leap, the night filled with their roars. Alira closed her eyes, praying for a miracle. And then, light. Blinding beams cut through the darkness. Gunfire rattled the air. Voices shouted, strong and commanding. Human soldiers stormed the outpost, their weapons blazing. Monsters screamed as bullets tore through them. One by one they fell, retreating back into the night. Daniel collapsed fully now, his knife falling from his hand. Alira cried out, holding him tightly. "No! Stay with me!" Soldiers rushed forward. One knelt beside them, checking Daniel's pulse. "He's alive!" Alira's tears spilled down her cheeks. She held Daniel's hand with both of hers, refusing to let go. The battle was over. The monsters were gone. The outpost was filled with human voices, light and movement again. But for Alira, only one thing mattered. Daniel had kept his promise. He had not left her. And as she sat there, clutching his hand, she knew the truth. Humans were not monsters. Humans could be hope. The monsters were gone. Their howls faded into the night as the last of them fled across the barren plains. Smoke and dust hung heavy in the air, but now there was also light, bright beams from human soldiers' weapons cutting through the dark. Alira sat on the ground, her small hands gripping Daniel's larger one. His body lay limp, his face pale. Blood stained his armor, his breathing was shallow. She pressed closer to him, refusing to let go. "Stay with me," she whispered, tears streaking down her dusty face. "Please, you promised." A soldier knelt beside them. He checked Daniel's pulse, then looked up. "He's alive but weak. We need to move him now." Others brought a stretcher, carefully lifting Daniel onto it. Alira tried to climb beside him, her small hands clawing at the edge. "No, don't leave me," she cried. A tall woman in uniform crouched to her level. Her eyes were sharp but kind. "It's all right, little one. He'll be safe. I'll take care of both of you." Alira hesitated, her chest tight. She looked back at Daniel. His hand twitched faintly, as if reaching for her. That was enough. She climbed onto the stretcher and held his hand tightly, refusing to let go even as they carried him away. They brought Daniel and Alira into the heart of the outpost. Though half ruined, it still had working lights, a medical room, and soldiers moving with purpose. For the first time in days, Alira heard voices that were not screams, footsteps that were not claws. Doctors rushed to Daniel, cutting away his damaged armor, cleaning his wounds. Alira sat nearby, her knees pulled to her chest, watching every movement with wide, fearful eyes. "Will he live?" she asked in a trembling voice. The doctor glanced at her, then at Daniel. "If he rests, if he fights, yes, he's strong." Her chest loosened. She pressed her forehead against Daniel's arm and whispered, "You must live. You're all I have." Hours passed. Soldiers brought food and water. Alira ate slowly, her eyes never leaving Daniel. At last his fingers twitched. His chest rose deeper. His eyes opened, faint but alive. Alira gasped. She dropped the cup and ran to him, clutching his hand. "Daniel!" His eyes found hers. His lips moved, his voice weak but steady. "You're safe." Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief. "We both are." Daniel gave the smallest smile, then drifted back into sleep, but his hand did not let go of hers. In the days that followed, the outpost came alive again. Survivors returned, soldiers repaired walls, fires were put out. The place that had once been a ruin began to breathe like a heart again. Alira walked through the camp, always staying close to Daniel's recovery bed. The soldiers looked at her with curiosity. Some smiled at her, others nodded kindly. She was not one of them, not human, but Daniel had fought for her. That was enough for them to accept her. One night, as the fires burned low, Alira sat beside Daniel while he slept. She whispered softly, "They said Ants were selfish. But they were wrong. Your hope." Her small hand squeezed his larger one. She remembered the moment in the ruins when she thought she would die. She remembered his promise, his strength, his stories of oceans and forests, and she knew her life had changed forever. When Daniel was strong enough to sit, Alira was the first person he saw waiting. She smiled, small but bright, and placed food into his hands. "You need it more than me," she said. He shook his head. "We share, always." Her smile grew wider. She nodded. The outpost became their new home, at least for now. Soldiers built defenses, Daniel healed, and Alira found a place among them. But even as safety grew around her, she never forgot the bond that had saved her life. Sometimes at night, Daniel told her more about Earth, about oceans, forests, children running free. Alira would close her eyes and imagine them, and sometimes she would tell him about her own people, her lost family, the little joys she remembered before the war. They were from different worlds, but in the ruins of battle, they had become something more. One evening as the sun set over the scarred land, Daniel and Alira stood together on the wall of the outpost. The sky was painted with red and gold. The world was still broken, monsters still roamed, war was not over. But for the first time, both felt something stronger than fear. Hope. Alira looked up at him. "What happens now?" Daniel gazed at the horizon. His face was tired, scarred, but his eyes were steady. "Now, We keep walking. We keep living. Together. Alira nodded. She reached for his hand, and he took it. And in that simple act, a truth was written. They were not just survivors anymore. They were family.